Hey guys, tonight we drift backward into the haze of ancient Alexandria, a city where marble temples catch the moonlight and the sea air carries the tang of salt, incense, and ambition. You walk across smooth stone streets, weaving through markets glowing with oil lamps, the murmur of Greek and Egyptian voices swirling together. And there she is, Cleopatra, not yet the legendary seductress of popular imagination, but a clever young woman in a palace full of enemies, where surviving each family dinner is almost as challenging as ruling a kingdom. You probably wouldn't survive this household for more than 5 minutes. The table politics alone could finish you off faster than poisoned wine. You drift deeper into the palace halls, where Cleopatra VII, Cleopatra, is born in 69 BCE. Her name alone sounds like it could fill a marble inscription. But what matters more is that she is the last of the Ptolemies, the Macedonian Greek dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the days of Alexander the Great. Her family tree is less of a tree and more of a tightly wound vine, siblings marrying siblings, uncles becoming husbands, and cousins occasionally turning up as rivals. It's like a royal soap opera, but with higher stakes and significantly fewer commercial breaks. One mainstream fact you can't escape is Cleopatra's sheer intellect. Ancient sources tell us she spoke not just Greek and Egyptian, but possibly Hebrew, Aramaic, Median, and maybe even the tongue of the Ethiopians. While most of her Ptolemaic ancestors couldn't be bothered to learn Egyptian, the language of the people they ruled, Cleopatra took pride in addressing her subjects directly. Imagine if your boss didn't just email you in corporate jargon, but also cracked a joke in your hometown slang. That's how disarming she must have been. Now, the quirky tidbit that makes you pause. Cleopatra may have had a surprisingly casual side. Some accounts whisper that she would disguise herself and wander Alexandria's bustling streets at night. Picture her slipping out in plain clothes, weaving through fishmongers and spice sellers, overhearing gossip about herself from vendors who had no clue the queen was standing right there. If true, that makes her the ancient world's version of scrolling the comment section, except way riskier and with better sandals. You continue along the palace corridors, where every sibling seems to eye her like a rival contestant on a cutthroat game show. At one point, Cleopatra is pushed off the throne by her brother Ptolemy XIII, forced to flee Egypt entirely. She doesn't crumble. Instead, she gathers resources and allies, waiting for the perfect moment to step back in. Historians still argue whether she was motivated by sheer survival instinct, genuine political vision, or an unshakable belief that she was destined for something greater. Either way, she doesn't play the role of a passive princess. She fights back, not with swords, but with strategy. You can almost see her now, leaning over maps of the Nile Delta, discussing shipments of grain, or calculating which Roman general might be most useful. She is sharp, restless, and already famous for a voice described as irresistible. Not necessarily her looks, but her ability to persuade, charm, and unsettle all at once. Imagine being so good at conversation that it changes the course of history. Meanwhile, most of us struggle to get a free upgrade on a flight. The markets of Alexandria buzz outside the palace walls. Spices, papyrus scrolls, exotic animals, and perfumes waft in from every corner of the Mediterranean. You wander past them, as if drifting through a dream, every sense pulled in a different direction. And above it all, Cleopatra is learning how to turn this city into her weapon. It's a crossroads of culture, a prize everyone wants. Rome hungers for it, and her siblings fight for it. But Cleopatra somehow makes Alexandria feel like an extension of herself. Brilliant, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. A stray breeze carries in the smell of incense and oil lamps, and you imagine her sitting there, maybe late at night, reading by lamplight. She was said to have studied medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. Her education, not just ornamental, but practical. Maybe that's why she knew how to slip through disasters. Maybe that's why she kept surviving when so many of her siblings didn't. You rest against a marble column, lulled by the hum of voices and the trickle of palace fountains. The weight of history presses softly, like a blanket, and you realize that Cleopatra's beginnings were never just about opulence or fame. They were about clawing her way to survival in a family where crowns were won with daggers hidden behind smiles. And though the world will later remember her for love affairs, scandals, and that snakebite legend, right now, she is just a girl learning how to outwit everyone around her. You're still leaning against that cool marble column, but now the sound of waves drifts closer, and a salty breeze slips in through an open courtyard. Cleopatra's life has already been a chessboard of betrayals, but the next move involves a new player, Rome. You shuffle down a shadowed hallway, half dreaming, half watching the curtains flutter. And when you step into the sunlight again, the figure waiting is Julius Caesar, already famous, already dangerous, already shaping the fate of half the known world. One solid fact is that Cleopatra was about 21 when she engineered her fateful meeting with Caesar. The legend is irresistible, smuggled into his quarters, wrapped inside a carpet, or maybe it was a sack of linen, depending on which storyteller you trust. Either way, picture the scene. A Roman general, weary from campaign dust, looks up to find a young queen suddenly unrolling at his feet like some kind of ancient piñata reveal. It sounds absurd, and yet, this is the moment her fortunes change. The quirky side? Cleopatra wasn't just banking on charm. She was staging theater. She knew appearances mattered, so she delivered herself like a gift, clever packaging included. If Amazon Prime had existed, she'd have nailed the branding, ribbon, and a handwritten thank you note. That theatrical instinct is what makes her stand out even now. She didn't just show up. She performed herself into power. As you wander the palace gardens, birds calling softly from fig trees, you realize that the stakes were colossal. Egypt wasn't just a jewel of the Nile. It was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Rome wanted its grain, and Caesar wanted control. Cleopatra offered both, but wrapped it in something more dazzling: herself. She becomes his ally, his lover, and eventually the mother of his child. Historians still argue whether their relationship was romance, political alliance, or a cocktail of both. But either way, it reshaped Egypt's destiny. The whispers of Alexandria follow you down to the harbor, where sleek ships rock gently against the docks. The city is alive with gossip. The queen and the Roman strolling together, hosting banquets, blending two worlds that should have clashed. Imagine the dinner spreads: roasted duck glazed with honey, pomegranates spilling their ruby seeds, wine flowing until even Caesar's stern face softened. And yet, you sense the unease. To Egyptians, Caesar is a foreign conqueror. To Romans, Cleopatra is a suspiciously ambitious woman. The city buzzes like a hive that might swarm at any moment. And then there's the great library of Alexandria, its scrolls gleaming in the torchlight. You drift past its colonnades, thinking about how Cleopatra supposedly contributed to its treasures, commissioning new works, gathering knowledge from all corners. The idea of the world's wisdom piled into scrolls feels fragile, especially when you recall that parts of it were lost in fires. Some say, even during Caesar's siege of the city, you can almost hear the crackle of flames licking parchment, history vanishing in smoke, while outside, the queen plays her political game. There's a strange, almost comedic detail tucked into this period. Caesar supposedly gave Cleopatra a giraffe as a gift. The animal was paraded through Rome, bewildering crowds who had never seen such a long-necked creature. Picture that. Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, trying to impress his mistress with a literal giraffe. Modern relationships fret over text response times. Theirs involved exotic zoo donations. The palace corridors blur again as you step deeper into the story. Cleopatra's gamble pays off for a while, but Rome is never simple. When Caesar is assassinated in 44 BCE, the queen's carefully balanced plans collapse into chaos. You can almost feel the silence in her chambers as news arrives. Daggers in the Senate, Caesar sprawled beneath a statue, and her future suddenly dangling by a thread. Here, the debates swirl like the Nile itself. Did Cleopatra truly love Caesar? Or did she calculate every move? Was she devastated at his death? Or already shifting to her next strategy? You hear the rustle of palm leaves in the night, as if whispering that history can't decide. You walk through a torchlit hallway, and a new figure begins to emerge in the shadows. Mark Antony. But before you meet him, pause to notice Cleopatra herself. She doesn't crumble. She dresses in splendor, stages processions, sails the Nile in a barge draped with gold and purple. She turns grief into theater, sadness into spectacle, ensuring no one forgets she is still queen. The breeze carries the scent of lotus blossoms as you sink down on a stone bench. The city hums, restless but alive, like it always has been. Cleopatra is reshaping her destiny once again, weaving grief into power. The marble beneath you feels cool, steady, eternal, yet the woman walking its halls is anything but steady. She is alive, improvising, calculating. She is Egypt's last gamble, playing against an empire too vast to contain. The marble bench fades beneath you, and suddenly you're standing on the deck of a ship. The Nile glitters like liquid bronze under the sun, and the sails above you catch a soft wind. Cleopatra isn't alone anymore. Now, Mark Antony has entered her orbit, and the world tilts once more. You steady yourself against the railing, feeling the hum of power in the planks beneath your feet. A solid fact first. Mark Antony was one of Rome's most powerful generals, a man known for bravery, feasts, and an ego that could probably fill the Colosseum twice over. Cleopatra met him in 41 BCE, and the meeting was pure theater as always. Picture this. Antony summons her to Tarsus, expecting a queen to arrive humbly. Instead, she sails up the river in a barge decked with gold and purple sails, reclining beneath a canopy while servants dressed as cupids fan her. Perfumes waft through the air, and locals gather on the banks to gape. Antony, who loved a spectacle, is absolutely smitten. Here's the quirky bit. Ancient sources describe Cleopatra dressing herself as the goddess Aphrodite when she met Antony. Talk about setting the tone. This wasn't just diplomacy, it was seduction by myth, a calculated performance where Antony didn't just meet a queen, he met a goddess. If Tinder profiles existed, hers would have been a cosmic power move, looking for someone who can handle a living deity. Must enjoy banquets, philosophy, and occasional world domination. You walk along the barge, the wood creaking gently. Servants bustle past with trays of fruit, figs, dates, grapes bursting with sweetness. And Antony sits nearby, already drunk on wine and the queen's confidence. The two of them strike a partnership, half political alliance, half fiery romance. It's messy, it's dramatic, and it shocks Rome. Because here's the thing, Antony already has a Roman wife. Aligning himself with Cleopatra makes him look like he's betraying Roman tradition. The scholars keep wrangling over this part. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was genuinely in love with Antony, or if he was simply her only path to maintaining Egypt's independence. But when you watch them laughing at those banquets, Antony dressed in ridiculous costumes, the two of them hosting feasts that lasted for days, you can't help but suspect it wasn't all cold calculation. The feasts themselves? Utterly legendary. Cleopatra once supposedly dissolved a priceless pearl in vinegar just to prove she could serve the most expensive drink in history. Imagine casually sipping a fortune while everyone else at the table tries to act cool. Like, oh yes, I dissolve my jewelry in my drinks all the time. Historians debate whether this story is true or exaggerated, but it captures the image Cleopatra wanted to project. Wealth beyond comprehension, control beyond challenge. You drift down a corridor of time again, and now you're walking through the crowded markets of Alexandria. Merchants shout over baskets of spices. Silk shimmers in the light. And Antony and Cleopatra's children, yes, they have several, play in shaded courtyards. Their union produces not just heirs, but also an image of two rulers shaping an empire together. To Egyptians, it looks divine. To Romans, it looks dangerous. And that's where the whispers get louder. Octavian, the future Augustus, begins spinning propaganda back in Rome. He paints Antony as weak, corrupted by an Eastern queen, enslaved by her charms. You hear echoes of it in the alleys. Antony dining like a pharaoh, Antony dressing like a god, Antony bowing to a woman. For Rome's rigid patriarchy, it's scandal on a cosmic scale. The ship tilts in your dream, as though you've stepped into the Battle of Actium itself. Sails strain, oars churn the sea, and war trumpets blare. This is the turning point, 31 BCE, when Antony and Cleopatra's forces clash with Octavian's navy. You grip the railing, feeling spray on your face. But then the strangest thing happens. Cleopatra's ships, caught in chaos, suddenly retreat. Some say she panicked. Others argue it was a planned escape. Either way, Antony, seeing her fleet depart, follows her. Historians still argue whether this was betrayal, strategy, or pure accident, but the effect is the same. Octavian wins. The wind fades, and you're back in a palace chamber. Cleopatra paces barefoot across polished stone, the scent of incense heavy in the air. Antony is unraveling, his once great reputation in tatters, while Octavian marches closer. Egypt trembles on the brink. You feel the coolness of the floor under your toes, the silence pressing in from the walls. The queen who once dissolved pearls in wine is now dissolving under the weight of inevitability. And yet, even here, Cleopatra refuses to fade quietly. She stages one last round of theater, retreating into her mausoleum and surrounding herself with treasures. Antony, misled into thinking she's already dead, falls on his sword. You catch a glimpse of him being carried to her, bleeding as she cradles him in her arms. The palace hums with grief, with endings that feel too large for one night. The torches flicker lower, shadows lengthening. The Nile outside flows steadily on, indifferent to all this drama. Antony's death leaves Cleopatra alone again, surrounded by enemies, plotting her final act. You lean against the cool stone wall, realizing the story is spiraling toward its most famous scene, and you're not ready to blink yet. The stone wall feels steady against your back, but the air is thick with smoke from the torches, and you know what's coming. The end of Cleopatra's story. The part every schoolbook condenses into a single line. You walk through the palace halls, past mosaics depicting gods and goddesses, past servants whispering with fear in their eyes. Outside, Octavian's forces tighten their grip around Alexandria, the city that once sang with markets and music now shudders under silence. Here's the hard fact. After Antony's death, Cleopatra becomes Rome's ultimate prize. Octavian wants her alive, paraded through the streets of Rome in chains as proof of his triumph. Imagine the humiliation. Egypt's queen dragged through a crowd that once adored her theatrics. Cleopatra, who had staged her entire life as myth and legend, decides she will not end as someone else's prop. You trail behind her as she retreats into her mausoleum, the chamber she had been preparing as both tomb and stage. She's dressed in regal robes, the kind dyed in costly Tyrian purple, with gold threads that shimmer faintly in the lamplight. Around her are treasures meant for eternity, statues of gods, jars of perfume, bolts of silk, and coins stamped with her profile. It's part storage room, part statement. I choose how my story ends. The quirky tidbit here: some ancient accounts claim she tested poisons on condemned prisoners to find the least painful way to die. Whether or not that's true, it shows the kind of pragmatism and ruthlessness that defined her rule. Imagine hosting a little science fair of death methods in your spare time. Grim, yes, but also very on brand for someone who spent her life balancing power with spectacle. Historians still argue whether the famous ass in a basket story is fact or propaganda. The classic tale goes like this. Cleopatra arranges for a basket of figs to be delivered, concealing a venomous snake inside. She reaches in, takes the bite, and dies swiftly, surrounded by 2 loyal attendants who follow her into death. But some scholars say the snake story is just too cinematic. Maybe she used poison instead, maybe even a hairpin laced with toxin. The debate lingers, unresolved, but the imagery is so perfect, that it stuck for 2,000 years. The queen who outwitted Rome by making her death her final act of theater. You step closer to her in the mausoleum, the air heavy with incense. She reclines on a couch draped with linen, calm in a way that unnerves you. She has outlived Caesar, Antony, and countless rivals, but she knows her children's fates will rest in Roman hands. There's tragedy here, not just the loss of a queen, but the end of Egypt as an independent power. With Cleopatra gone, Egypt becomes a Roman province. The Ptolemaic dynasty dissolving like salt in water. Octavian enters soon after, but too late. Cleopatra is already gone. Imagine the mix of rage and awe on his face, his greatest enemy, denied to him by her own hand. Rome will celebrate, of course. He'll turn the victory into propaganda, reshape himself into Augustus, the first emperor. But Cleopatra will live on, not as a conquered queen, but as a legend who refused submission. As you linger in the mausoleum, the torches dim lower, shadows stretching like soft curtains. The noise of soldiers fades. The Nile's steady murmur takes over, and Cleopatra seems less like a historical figure and more like a myth drifting into eternity. Her story doesn't end with defeat. It ends with control, with a queen who refused to be anyone's trophy. And that brings you into the wind down, where the edges of the tale blur into dream. The mausoleum dissolves into darkness, and you find yourself lying back as though on a soft bed. The weight of the story fades, replaced by the hush of evening air. Cleopatra's voice, Antony's laughter, the roar of Roman crowds. All of it drifts further and further away, until it's only the faint lapping of the Nile in your ears. The river has seen it all, and it continues to flow, steady, endless, untroubled by human triumph or tragedy. Your breath slows, matching that gentle current. The torches that once flared so brightly burn lower now, their glow no more than embers against the velvet dark. The grand halls of Alexandria, the lavish banquets, the golden barge on the river, they soften, blur, become indistinct, as though painted on a canvas left too long in the sun. You let go of the details, allowing them to fade one by one. The pearl dissolved in vinegar, the barge that smelled of incense and roses, the crown set carefully on dark hair. Each image drifts past like clouds, light and untouchable, floating further until they vanish entirely. And in that quiet, you feel safe. History may have been full of noise, scandal, and intrigue, but here, at the edge of sleep, everything slows. You are weightless, unburdened, carried by the steady hum of time itself. The story is over now, but the calm remains, like a hand gently smoothing the air around you. So breathe deeply, let your eyelids grow heavy, and allow yourself to sink into rest. You are safe, you are warm, and you are drifting softly into dreams. We slip beneath the torchlight of Cleopatra's palace, into a hall that smells of roasted figs, honeyed wine, and too much incense for anyone's lungs to handle. You are here not as a guest of honor, but as one of the countless onlookers shuffled in behind the important people, wedged somewhere between a foreign merchant and a court scribe who already looks like he regrets coming. You glance up at the glittering ceiling, painted in blues so deep it almost tricks you into thinking you're outdoors beneath the night sky. And yes, you probably won't survive the strong wine if you drink it like the courtiers do. But don't worry, you're here to listen, not to keep up. The banquet around you swells with sound. Musicians pluck lutes, someone claps on the wrong beat, and servants shuffle plates of bread sprinkled with sesame. Cleopatra herself lounges on a gilded couch, her presence less intimidating than you expected, less Hollywood femme fatale, and more queen who has learned how to endure hours of tedious ceremony with grace. When she gestures, the chatter drops, and the storytellers step forward. They begin not with politics, but with myths. Tonight, myths are the entertainment course, served between platters of roasted goose and dates stuffed with almonds. The first tale is of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and revelry. The storyteller, a man with a voice like gravel smoothed by honey, exaggerates every gesture. He sways as if tipsy, though you suspect the act is rehearsed. You hear laughter ripple across the couches. Because what better myth to tell at a banquet than one about drinking too much and turning it into divine purpose? A mainstream fact drifts through your memory. Cleopatra's court really was a cultural melting pot, where Greek and Egyptian traditions mingled like two wines in one goblet. Many of her banquets were staged performances of this very fusion. Greek myths retold in Egyptian cadence. Egyptian myths repainted with Greek metaphors. Tonight's storytelling embodies that mix. Dionysus, stumbling among vineyards, suddenly bumps into Osiris, Egyptian lord of fertility and renewal, who kindly offers him farming tips. A crossover episode. Before crossovers were cool, the scribe next to you scribbles notes furiously, but you're busy watching Cleopatra's expression. She doesn't just tolerate the myth, she leans into it, encouraging the blend. Maybe this is her subtle way of reminding everyone that she rules as a queen of both Greek lineage and Egyptian throne. Or maybe she's just enjoying the wine jokes. One fringe tidbit gets whispered by the merchant at your elbow. Some claimed Cleopatra had her own perfume factory, where scents were mixed to evoke mythic gods. Imagine a fragrance named after Dionysus, probably smelled like grapes, sweat, and bad decisions. You chuckle softly, then immediately cover it with a fake cough when the scribe glares at you. As the storyteller moves on, he gestures at the dishes before you, weaving food into the myth. Dionysus plucks figs from a tree, and in the hall, servants pass trays of figs stuffed with honey. The myth becomes edible, and you realize how immersive this theater really is. Guests aren't just hearing myths, they're tasting them, smelling them, slipping into them. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra staged these stories for genuine belief or calculated political theater. Was she entertaining her allies or teaching them that Egypt could embrace every culture without losing itself? The debate fades into the background as another servant tops up your cup. You sip carefully, diluted wine, but still enough to make the room blur slightly. Now, the storyteller turns to an Egyptian tale. Isis, piecing together her husband Osiris after betrayal. The hall grows quieter, reverent even. It's not just a study, it's a ritual echo. And Cleopatra herself, draped in shining fabric, seems to embody Isis for a moment. The queen who protects, who restores, who rules through both beauty and cunning. But the solemn mood can't last. This is still a party. Another performer interrupts with a parody. What if Osiris had misplaced not his body, but his sandals, and Isis had to search every corner of the Nile to find them? The hall roars with gentle laughter. You smile too, realizing that even sacred myths had their bedtime parody versions. The way we might tell a goofy bedtime story to lighten the dark. The night lengthens, and you grow comfortable. The clinking of cups becomes background music. The myths spiral onward. Some serious, some silly, all woven into the tapestry of Cleopatra's reign. You feel your eyelids dip, lulled by the rhythm of voices, the flicker of torchlight, and the warmth of wine you never ordered, but somehow keeps arriving. The banquet hall, the myths, the queen herself, they blur into something dreamlike, as if history and legend are conspiring to rock you gently toward sleep. And you realize you don't need to separate fact from myth tonight. Both are welcome here, in the company of Cleopatra's storytellers. The hall doesn't fall quiet for long. Plates are cleared, goblets refilled, and another storyteller rises with the kind of swagger that says he's practiced in front of mirrors or amphorae, more than actual people. His theme tonight: myths of gods and wine, and how both tend to create a lot of awkward mornings after. He begins with Dionysus again, but this time the god is not merely drunk. He's inventing clever tricks to justify his revelry. You lean closer, intrigued, as he describes Dionysus discovering that if you press grapes, ferment them, and store them just right, you've basically invented a hangover delivery system that could topple empires. The guests chuckle, and someone across the room mutters that empires did, in fact, fall to wine. You can't help thinking, well, at least history admits it. You pick up on a mainstream fact woven neatly into the tale. Egyptians, too, had their rituals around wine, though beer was often more common. In Cleopatra's court, however, wine became a statement. Luxury imported, poured, and flavored with herbs and spices. Tonight, as myth and drink blur, you're aware that you're tasting something Cleopatra herself curated as much as the story. But then the storyteller veers sideways, bringing in Osiris. He recounts how Osiris taught humans agriculture, how he was dismembered and reassembled, and how this cycle mirrored the planting of seeds and the harvest of crops. Yet in his retelling, Osiris shares a vineyard with Dionysus, casually advising him on soil quality. A Greek-Egyptian mashup, if there ever was one. Cleopatra smiles faintly at the blending. It mirrors her own identity. Greek blood on an Egyptian throne, ruling by merging rather than dividing. The scribe near you frowns, clearly trying to decide whether this tale counts as sacrilegious or clever satire. Meanwhile, the merchant leans over again and whispers a fringe tidbit. Some say Cleopatra herself blended custom wines infused with lotus petals or resin, intended not only to intoxicate, but to evoke divine visions. Imagine trying to explain that to your modern bartender. Yes, I'll have the Osiris Lotus Vision Special. Light on the resin, please. You stifle a laugh. The tale rolls on, and the rhythm of his voice pulls you into a trance. Dionysus becomes a trickster god who convinces mortals they're more charming than they really are. Osiris becomes the patient farmer who fixes the vineyard after Dionysus has trampled through it. The contrast makes the audience grin. Two deities with opposite vibes, yet bound together by humanity's need for food and drink. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra emphasized Osiris in her court stories because she wished to model herself as Isis, his partner, the eternal queen. Was she playing politics or simply nurturing the cultural fabric that kept Egypt whole? In this moment, you realize the distinction doesn't matter. For the guests sipping wine, Osiris isn't propaganda. He's a reminder that crops will grow again, even if drunken gods stomp them flat. Servants circulate with fresh platters, roasted pigeons glazed with honey. The storyteller cleverly ties this dish into the myth, suggesting Dionysus once convinced mortals to roast birds after a feast gone wrong. Laughter erupts. You bite into a pigeon wing and realize, begrudgingly, that it does pair nicely with the wine. The performer shifts gears once more, reciting verses like a hymn. His tone grows serious. Wine is a god's gift, but it is also a chain. The hall hushes. Even you feel the solemnity tug at your thoughts. You sense the myth morphing into something like philosophy, the way myths often do when the night wears long. Then, like a cymbal crash, he snaps back to levity, declaring that Dionysus once turned pirates into dolphins simply because they wouldn't share their wine. Someone across the room bursts into laughter, loud enough to spill his goblet. You think to yourself, if that's true, then dolphins have been drunk sailors all along. The banquets at Cleopatra's palace were never about mere food and drink. They were staged, immersive experiences designed to remind every ambassador, general, and scholar that Egypt was both ancient and adaptable. And here you sit, wrapped in the stories of gods who drink, plant, feast, and blunder their way across history. As the applause swells, Cleopatra raises her cup and takes the smallest sip. She doesn't need to drink much. The room drinks for her. You imagine what she might be thinking. Perhaps amused, perhaps calculating, perhaps simply tired of hearing Dionysus stumble through another banquet. The night drifts onward, but your body feels heavy, lulled by the soft music, the flickering torches, and the warmth of the stories. You realize the line between myth and memory has already blurred. For these guests, gods and wine and rulers all share the same stage. For you, it's just another step toward drowsy contentment. The wine haze thickens, but the stories keep coming, each tale slipping in like another course on Cleopatra's endless table. Tonight, you don't get just gods. You get the parade of heroes, monsters, and awkward debates that follow wherever myths wander. The new storyteller, younger and perhaps too eager, begins with Hercules. He strides into the tale with exaggerated muscle-flexing motions, describing how Hercules performed his 12 labors. In the hall, servants set down a platter of lamb seasoned with herbs, and someone mutters that slaying the Nemean lion was probably easier than chewing this meat. You smirk quietly. Your modern jaw might not be heroic enough either. A mainstream fact surfaces in the back of your mind. Cleopatra's court was genuinely fascinated by Greek heroes. Alexander the Great was still a towering figure in collective memory, and Hercules was sometimes claimed as his ancestor. No wonder such tales were popular here. Myths became subtle ways to flatter guests by reminding them of shared heroic legacies. But soon, the tale twists. Hercules doesn't just wrestle lions. He finds himself in the Egyptian desert, confused about which river is the Nile and which is a mirage. The audience chuckles. especially when the storyteller describes Hercules begging a crocodile for directions. You picture it vividly. The mighty hero humbled, dripping sweat, being lectured by a reptile. A fringe tidbit bubbles up. Some Greco-Egyptian art actually depicted Hercules wrestling crocodiles, a bizarre fusion of local fauna with imported myth. Imagine the heroic statue, veins popping, crocodile unimpressed. The hall bursts into laughter again, and even Cleopatra hides a smile behind her hand. You realize that part of the entertainment is not reverence, but irreverence. Myths were flexible, reshaped for humor, or to let courtiers see themselves as cleverer than even the gods and heroes. The storyteller shifts gears, now recounting the serpent monsters that haunted sailors. He describes sea dragons twisting beneath waves, serpents coiled around ships, and heroic men swinging swords that always seem to miss the first 3 times. You glance at the merchant beside you, who leans in with a quiet note. Some say sailors really did encounter giant oarfish near the Nile Delta. You nod, suddenly imagining a fisherman mistaking a slippery fish for a dragon. Historians still argue whether such myths preserve distorted accounts of real creatures, or if they were simply stories told to make sailors sound braver. The young storyteller grows animated, staging a miniature debate in the middle of the hall. He impersonates 2 philosophers arguing. One insists Hercules defeated a monster single-handedly. The other insists it was a group effort, and Hercules just hogged the credit. The courtiers laugh, nudging one another. You grin because it feels almost modern, like listening to fans argue about who carried the team in last night's game. The scribe beside you sighs and scribbles even faster, perhaps trying to record every word. You're tempted to peek, but you know you'd only see cramped hieroglyphs or rushed Greek letters, impossible to follow after your 3rd cup of wine. Instead, you focus on the room itself, the flicker of torchlight, the patterned mosaic floor, the mingling smells of roasted meat and spiced honey. The banquet is no longer just a meal. It's an immersive theater, every sense caught in the act. Then comes a quieter story, slipped in like a lullaby. The voyage of Odysseus retold not as an epic, but as a sleepy traveler, constantly asking for directions. The storyteller describes Odysseus politely knocking on doors across the Mediterranean, getting lost at every turn, apologizing to monsters for intruding. The guests chuckle softly, their laughter subdued now, like embers glowing rather than flames burning. A thought drifts through you. Maybe these softened versions of myths served another purpose, letting people end the night not with adrenaline, but with a smile, the kind of humor that makes sleep easier. After all, even heroes deserve a little comic relief before bedtime. As the tale winds down, Cleopatra's musicians pluck at gentle strings, almost like a lullaby for the entire court. You notice heads tilting, shoulders relaxing. Even the queen herself leans back deeper into her couch, her eyes half-lidded, and you too feel the weight of the banquet pressing down. Not the heaviness of politics or power struggles, but the heaviness of soft storytelling, of myths made into dreams. The monsters fade into shadows, the heroes into gentle caricatures. The night is not ending yet, but already you sense it tilting toward sleep. The banquet stretches on, but the mood has shifted. The loudest laughs are spent, the bravado has cooled, and what remains is a softer hum, the faint plucking of strings, the occasional clink of a goblet set down with care, the gentle rustle of linen as guests sink deeper into their couches. You're still there, caught between history and dream, listening as the last storytellers take their turn. They begin not with grand heroes or stumbling gods, but with quieter myths, the kind that lean into whispers. A tale of Isis weaving a spell at twilight, her voice laced into the reeds along the Nile. A fragment of Orpheus drifting on the breeze, the sound of his lyre tangled in the wind like an old song you can almost hum but never quite remember. Cleopatra tilts her head, clearly savoring these subtler stories. The way they fill the silence rather than shatter it. The servants move more slowly now, carrying smaller dishes, bowls of dates, a drizzle of honey, almonds roasted until golden. It feels less like feasting and more like the sleepy grazing you do when the main event is over. A mainstream fact flickers in your mind. Cleopatra's court did prize music and poetry at these gatherings, not only politics. Banquets were a stage for art as much as for alliance. Yet here comes the quirky tidbit. Someone claims that Cleopatra once invited a performer to recite an entire myth backwards, just to see if anyone noticed. You picture it, an epic unraveling into nonsense. Heroes marching into monsters' bellies, gods turning sober instead of drunk. And still, you suspect, the court politely applauded at the end. The last debate of the night is soft, almost playful. One philosopher argues that myths are eternal truths. Another insists they're bedtime fables for adults. Cleopatra smiles without taking a side. Historians still argue whether she herself believed the divine stories or merely used them as tools. But in this hush, you sense belief doesn't matter. What matters is how the stories land. On ears weary from food, on eyes heavy with candlelight, on hearts softened by music. The banquet hall feels smaller now, as if its walls have leaned inward, tucking everyone into a shared drowsiness. You glance once more at Cleopatra, her eyes half closed, her golden bracelets catching the last flickers of torchlight. Around her, courtiers murmur half sentences, then trail off, the myths melting into private dreams. The voices dim, the myths blur, and suddenly you feel as though you're drifting, not just into history, but into your own sleep. The torches crackle like lullabies. The musicians slow their hands, and the whole room exhales at once. It is not an ending, not really. It is a surrender to the night. And now, as the banquet fades entirely, you find yourself wrapped in the soft hush that lingers after all stories have been told. The torches dim, their smoke curling into the rafters like gentle clouds. The laughter that once echoed has dissolved into murmurs, then into silence, until only the low hum of the night air remains. You feel the floor beneath you, steady and cool, while the cushions cradle you with a weight that asks nothing of you. The myths you've heard, of gods stumbling through vineyards, of heroes humbled by crocodiles, of queens who listen with quiet amusement, no longer press upon you as tales to be remembered. Instead, they drift like feathers, light and formless, settling into the corners of your thoughts without demand. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of the distant strings as the musicians pluck their final notes. The stories dissolve into sensations: the taste of honey, the scent of lotus, the faint glow of gold against stone. Each detail stretches out, softer, slower, until even memory feels like a dream. The banquet hall recedes into the distance as if you're being gently carried away on the Nile itself, its waters dark and endless, rocking you in a cradle as old as time. The voices of the storytellers blur into the sound of the current, soothing, patient, unhurried. You realize you don't need to hold on to them. They will keep floating whether you listen or not, and so you let go. You let the myths blur into sleep, the palace dissolve into shadow, and the queen herself fade into silence. What remains is only the steady hum around you, the calm breath within you, and the slow drift into dreams. We slip into the dusty sandals of a very ordinary Alexandrian merchant, living nearly 2,000 years ago in Egypt's shimmering port city. The sun hasn't even lifted itself fully above the Mediterranean, and already the streets creak with life. You can hear the creak of ropes from ships still tied at the quay, the low moan of oxen dragging carts, and the scatter of early vendors setting out fish that somehow smell both fresh and rotten at the same time. You probably won't survive this morning if you're picky about odors. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I'm curious who else is trudging through history with me right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle toward the harbor with your cart creaking behind you, its wheels complaining louder than your own joints. Alexandria, after all, was designed with grandeur in mind. Straight avenues cut through the city like a Roman general's marching orders. Colonnades catching the new sunlight. Statues staring down at you as if to say, "Don't scuff the marble, peasant." You ignore them. You have work to do. The Pharaoh's lighthouse looms in the distance, one of the wonders of the world, blinking faintly with its mirrored fire, even as dawn begins to win. It's not for you, of course. That beacon is for ships stuffed with grain, papyrus, wine, and occasionally live animals you'd rather not think about. Your little stall of goods feels pathetic in comparison, but it's survival. A few amphorae of olive oil, some dyed cloth scraps, maybe a jar of imported honey if you're lucky. The harbor, though, is where every transaction begins. Whether you're dealing in spices from India or sandals mended 3 times over, the smell is overwhelming. Tar, salt, and that pungent perfume of rotting fish guts that cling to the cobblestones. It seeps into your tunic. Congratulations, you smell like work. Sailors shout in Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and languages you can't even place. This city is a salad of accents. The Ptolemies built it as a jewel of Hellenistic order, but now it's a Roman jewel with slightly tarnished edges. Historians still argue whether ordinary Alexandrians felt more Greek, more Egyptian, or just permanently confused. You just want someone to buy your oil. A tax collector wanders by, eyes sharp as a hawk. You feel that familiar twist in your stomach. Rome doesn't care that your son needs sandals. Rome cares that Caesar's coffers stay fat. You try not to meet his gaze, adjusting your jars to look busier than you are. The man lingers, counts something in his wax tablet, and then drifts away, probably toward richer prey. You exhale. Nearby, a man selling dried fish sneezes violently, then laughs, spraying half his stall with the force of it. You smirk, half amused, half horrified. You'd think standing in clouds of salt and seaweed would preserve the lungs, but apparently not. Still, he waves to you, neighbors in the eternal struggle of trying to earn a drachma before midday. A few children dart past, chasing each other with reeds, their laughter slicing through the chaos. One nearly collides with your cart, and you grab the handles just in time. A jar wobbles, tilts, but somehow stays upright. Small victories. You mutter a prayer to Serapis under your breath. You're not entirely sure if he listens, but sometimes muttering feels better than swearing. Did you know that in this city, people once used crocodile dung mixed with fermented plant matter as a kind of sunscreen? Someone probably thought it worked. You glance at the sailors frying under the morning glare and wonder whether you should start bottling the stuff yourself. The market might be there, though smelling like a swamp probably wouldn't improve your social life. A loud argument breaks out at the quay. Two men screaming over the price of pepper. Pepper, that black dust from India that costs more than gold in some places. One insists it's genuine. The other swears it's sawdust dyed black. You lean closer, pretending to rearrange your jars, because entertainment is rare, and free shouting matches are the city's equivalent of Netflix. The crowd forms, bets are whispered, and the harbor continues to pulse with energy, as though nothing could ever quiet it. You push on, muscles straining, until you claim your patch of ground near a row of striped awnings. You spread your goods, swatting away flies. Around you, the chorus builds, hawkers yelling about pomegranates, sailors laughing about last night's tavern escapades, a donkey braying like it wants to file a formal complaint against existence itself. Somewhere, a philosopher stands on a crate, declaiming about the true nature of justice. He wears a ragged cloak and hasn't bathed in a week, but his voice carries. A few students nod sagely, while others hide smirks. You roll your eyes. Philosophy doesn't fill bellies, unless someone pays you to copy the words onto papyrus, which you've never been fortunate enough to do. You suspect his students aren't paying either. You pause for a breath, leaning against your cart. The sun has fully risen now, glaring down at the tiled roofs and the harbor's forest of masts. Your day is just beginning. The jars need to be sold, the coins need to jingle in your pouch, and somehow you need to make it home without drawing the taxman's attention again. Welcome to your morning in Alexandria, grand, chaotic, and already a little sweaty. You settle under the striped awning, grateful for even the flimsy shade, and start arranging your jars of oil and scraps of cloth like they're priceless treasures. They're not. But appearances matter in a city where everyone wants to look richer than they are. Across from you, a baker dusts his bread with sesame seeds, their nutty aroma competing with the briny stench of the harbor. Your stomach growls. You think about trading a splash of oil for a loaf, but you remember yesterday. You already traded too much. If you keep feeding your hunger first, you'll end up selling empty jars. The customers begin drifting in like gulls. circling, eyeing, waiting for a chance to swoop. An old woman inspects your cloth, tugging the fibers like she's testing the strength of rope. You assure her it's good quality, imported dye. The color won't run, even if she washes it in Nile water 3 times. She squints at you, skeptical, and mutters about the price being too high. You've been through this before. The haggling is the dance. If you name 1 drachma, expect her to counter with half a drachma and a chicken feather. Eventually, you'll settle somewhere in the middle, both of you pretending you won. Nearby, 2 men shout over figs, waving their arms like they're negotiating a peace treaty. One yells in Greek, the other in Egyptian, neither willing to switch tongues, so the argument grows louder and more theatrical. You glance at them, amused. Negotiation here is less about words and more about pride. The louder you are, the closer you must be to victory. And then comes the worst sound of the day, the scraping cough of the tax official's stylus against his wax tablet. He's back, drifting through the stalls like a hawk over a field. He stops by the baker, notes something, then turns toward you. Your pulse quickens. You shuffle your jars, trying to look small but respectable. Too poor to bother taxing heavily. Too presentable to accuse of dodging dues. Oil, he says flatly, poking a jar with his stylus. You nod. He squints, counting silently, then writes. You wonder if he's even recording numbers, or just doodling to remind you who's in charge. Rome's grip stretches even here into every amphora and coin purse. Historians still argue whether Alexandria thrived under Rome's empire or suffered in quiet resentment. You, personally, don't have the luxury of arguing. You just know Rome wants its cut. He moves on, and you breathe easier. A customer approaches immediately, a young man in a crisp linen tunic, obviously new to the art of bargaining. You can tell by the way he stares too eagerly at the oil, like he's already decided to buy. You keep your voice casual, mentioning that sailors have been asking about it all morning, that it's nearly gone. He hesitates, frowns, but finally pays more than it's worth. Victory. Your pouch grows heavier. As the day swells toward midday, the market becomes a storm. Donkeys clatter past with baskets of dates. Jugglers perform half-hearted tricks in the sun, and rumor races faster than any cart. Someone claims a shipment of cinnamon just arrived from the Red Sea. Someone else swears it's fake, just colored bark. Someone whispers about a new edict from Rome concerning grain shipments, and suddenly the air feels tense. You lean in, listening, trying to catch details. Rumor is a commodity too. It shapes tomorrow's prices, tomorrow's risks. Your neighbor, the fishmonger, nudges you. Heard the Serapeum's library is getting new scrolls from Athens, he says, eyes gleaming. You chuckle. What does a fishmonger need with Aristotle? He grins back, explaining that his nephew works as a copyist, and every new scroll means more work, more bread on the table. Strange how the fates of scholars and sellers of mackerel can intertwine in this city. You try to keep your stall tidy, but dust sticks to everything, and flies never leave. Still, the coins pile slowly. You tuck them into a pouch tied close to your waist, closer than your heart. You joke to yourself. If you lose them, the family doesn't eat. That pouch is more sacred than any shrine. By mid-afternoon, the heat presses down like a weight. Merchants shout more weakly now, throats dry, sweat trickling. A boy offers you a cup of watered wine for a copper coin. You hesitate, then buy it. The wine tastes like someone rinsed a grape in Nile water and called it a day, but at least it's wet. You smile wryly. Luxury comes in many flavors, and most of them taste faintly of mud. Every so often, you hear a philosopher's voice drifting over the stalls, preaching about moderation, about living simply. You roll your eyes again. Easy to say when someone else is feeding you. You mutter that if he wants true wisdom, he should try haggling with the old woman who's back again, still tugging at your cloth. You notice a commotion near the spice stall. A Roman officer, bronze armor gleaming, points accusingly at a merchant. Something about pepper again. The crowd quiets, tension humming. You edge closer, pretending to examine a basket of garlic. The officer accuses the merchant of cheating, diluting the pepper with charcoal dust. The merchant swears innocence, sweat beading on his forehead. Will there be punishment? A fine? Or worse, lashes? Nobody knows. The officer finally storms off, muttering, leaving the merchant pale, but breathing. You sigh, relieved it wasn't you. As the sun begins its slow descent, the market thins. Shoppers carry baskets home, donkeys groan under loads, and you count your coins discreetly. It's not riches, but it's enough. Enough to buy bread, enough to keep the tax man off your back, enough to try again tomorrow. You pack your jars carefully, tucking them into the cart, ready to haul them through the labyrinth of streets back to your cramped little home. Your day in the marketplace has ended, but its noise lingers in your ears. Shouts, laughter, arguments, gossip. Alexandria never truly goes quiet. And tomorrow, you'll return to repeat it all again, hoping fortune shifts just slightly more in your favor. You heave the cart back through Alexandria's streets, shoulders aching, dust clinging to your skin like an extra tunic you never asked for. The sun's glare softens, but the heat remains, radiating off stone walls that have been baking all day. Every corner offers a new scent. Bakeries still turning out loaves for the evening meal. Incense curling from household shrines, sewage trickling somewhere you'd rather not think about. Alexandria is glamorous in the guidebooks, but your sandals slap against reality. You arrive at your neighborhood, a maze of narrow alleys where voices bounce between walls like trapped sparrows. Your home is modest, a cramped courtyard dwelling you share with too many relatives and not enough privacy. You slip through the doorway, greeted not by marble grandeur, but by a wooden door creaking on tired hinges. Inside, the family is waiting. Your wife already has bread cooling on a rough clay plate. The aroma, soft and comforting, even if the loaf is thin. The children swarm you like locusts, tugging at your tunic, asking if you brought anything sweet. You ruffle their hair, laughing, though you wish you could offer more than a crumb of dried fig. Tonight, bread and olives will have to do. You sit cross-legged on the worn mat, lowering yourself like an old man. Though you're not that old, the day makes you feel ancient. The meal is shared, each bite stretched carefully. A cousin drops by with news. Someone in the neighborhood saw a shooting star last night, a sign of either good fortune or looming disaster, depending on whom you ask. Historians still argue whether ancient Alexandrians saw omens as entertainment or genuine terror. You just know your children's eyes widen at the tale, chewing olives more slowly, their imaginations already halfway to the heavens. The conversation drifts to neighbors. Someone's goat escaped again, trampling through a laundry line. Someone else swears their landlord is raising rent. You nod sympathetically, though inside you feel a flicker of relief. It's not your goat, not your landlord, at least not tonight. Neighborhood gossip is its own form of currency, traded freely, binding you all together in your shared struggles. After the bread, you tend to your tiny household altar. A small clay figure of Isis sits crookedly, her painted eyes long faded. You light a pinch of incense, whispering a prayer for protection. Not too loudly. You don't want to wake the baby, finally asleep after fussing all evening. The smoke curls upward, faint against the starlit courtyard sky. You wonder, not for the first time, whether these prayers actually change anything. Still, saying them feels like insurance against chaos. And Alexandria has plenty of chaos to spare. Your eldest son wants to learn letters, scratching symbols into the dust with a stick. You crouch beside him, trying to copy the shapes you half remember from temple walls and market signs. You're not a scholar, never will be, but you know enough to recognize the power of writing. Scrolls move empires. Words outlive merchants. You wish you could afford a tutor, but for now, the dust serves as paper, and imagination is ink enough. Later, as the courtyard cools, you mend a sandal by lamplight. The leather is cracked, but replacing it costs too much. Your wife teases you. Maybe you should sell sandals instead of oil. You grin, reminding her that sandals wear out. Oil is forever. She rolls her eyes. Marriage is a series of tiny negotiations, not unlike the marketplace, except here, you always lose gracefully. The children chase each other through the courtyard until you bark at them to quiet down. The neighbors already complain about noise, though they themselves argue late into the night. Thin walls make for loud lives. Privacy is a luxury only the wealthy enjoy. You've learned to live with shared air, shared laughter, and shared frustrations. Did you know some Alexandrians kept monkeys as pets, dressing them up to amuse guests? You imagine your household trying that. Your youngest tugging at a monkey's tail, the monkey shrieking, the olives flying everywhere. You laugh quietly to yourself. Probably best you can't afford exotic animals. A goat is trouble enough. When the night grows deeper, you step outside the courtyard for a breath of cooler air. Lamps flicker in nearby doorways. Voices murmur through walls. Somewhere, a woman sings, her voice drifting with the warm breeze. You lean against the wall, tired but oddly content. The day has been hard, the coins few, but your family is safe. The bread eaten, the roof still standing. In Alexandria, that counts as victory. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Maybe the tax man again. Maybe another quarrel over pepper. Maybe a streak of luck. You can't know. But tonight, in the narrow lanes of your neighborhood, surrounded by family and chatter, you find a fragile peace. The night air in Alexandria cools at last. A thin relief after the day's hammering sun. You ease yourself away from the courtyard and back into the street, drawn by the city's evening pulse. The stalls are shuttered, but the taverns spill laughter and the smell of cheap wine. You join the flow, sandals scuffing over flagstones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The stars overhead blink faintly, competing with the glow of oil lamps strung along alleys like flickering constellations made by human hands. You duck into a tavern, low-roofed and smoky. The room hums with voices. Sailors nursing bruises and mugs, merchants like yourself unwinding, and a few philosophers too drunk to remember moderation. You order watered wine. It tastes only slightly better than what you had earlier, though the second sip numbs the tongue enough that you stop caring. Across the room, two men argue in Greek over whether Alexandria is still truly Greek or hopelessly Romanized. Historians still argue that too, and you smile at the irony. Some debates never change, no matter the century. A lyre player plucks out a tune, a little clumsy but soothing. You sway slightly, letting the music melt into you. The tavern smells of sweat, roasted chickpeas, and sour wine. Unpleasant in theory, but strangely comforting in the moment. A neighbor waves you over, slides a plate of salted fish toward you, and insists you eat. You oblige, chewing carefully, hoping it won't betray you later in the night. Later, you slip back outside. The streets are calmer now, though pockets of revelry echo from distant corners. You walk toward the harbor, where the air is cooler and the great lighthouse still throws its beam into the dark sea. You stand for a moment, gazing at it. That flame guides sailors from across the world, but for you, it's just another reminder. Alexandria is vast, and your place within it is small. Yet without small traders, without oil jars and sandals and bread, even wonders like this city cannot breathe. You pause at a shrine tucked into a wall niche, its stone figure weathered but dignified. You light a tiny wick, whispering another prayer. This time, not for profit, but for health, for safety, for enough. You know the gods may not listen, but perhaps the act itself is enough to quiet the day's anxieties. The smoke curls, and your breath slows. Finally, you turn homeward. The alleys grow darker. The noise fades to murmurs, and only the occasional bark of a dog reminds you that the city never entirely sleeps. You step back into your courtyard, where your wife already dozes. Children, sprawled like starfish across mats. You lie down, joints creaking, eyes heavy. Another day survived, another day earned. Your last thoughts drift between gratitude and worry. Will tomorrow's sales be better? Will Rome's taxes tighten further? Will your son learn his letters before his sandals give out again? Questions ripple like waves on the shore. But as your breathing steadies, the night air strokes your face. And for now, you surrender to sleep. And now, let your mind slow, like the harbor quieting after the last ship ties its ropes. Imagine yourself walking through those streets one last time. Lanterns dimming, sandals brushing softly over the stones. Voices dissolving into the hush of night. The air is cooler now, easier on the lungs, carrying only the faintest sense of bread and salt, fading into calm. Picture the great lighthouse far in the distance. Its flame steady, patient, reaching across the dark waters. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't falter. It simply shines. Let that steady glow become the rhythm of your own breathing, rising and falling, guiding you gently toward rest. Your shoulders are tired, your hands rough from the day's work. But here, in this quiet moment, the burdens loosen. The coins are counted, the jars are stacked, the children are safe. Whatever worries belong to tomorrow, they can wait. Tonight, there is only stillness. The courtyard is cool beneath the stars. You stretch out on the mat, the sounds of your family close and comforting. Their soft breathing becomes a lullaby, mingling with the hush of the distant sea. Every sound grows slower, softer, melting into silence. Now, feel the weight of the day slipping away from you, like sand falling through open fingers. You are safe. You are sheltered. You are enough. The city around you fades into a gentle blur. Streets quiet, harbor still, sky wide and endless above. So let go. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Drift as slowly as the tide, as steadily as the lighthouse beam, into a calm and dreamless sleep. We drift down the Nile, not in the noisy tourist boats with neon lights, but in your imagination, slipping through reeds, hearing frogs croak from the marshes, and catching the faint perfume of blossoms that once flavored the diets of pharaohs and fishermen alike. The river smells a little muddy, the kind of scent that clings to sandals when you step too close. You probably won't survive this kind of ancient diet. It was more fibrous, more unpredictable, and occasionally spiced with questionable irrigation water. But hey, that's the adventure. You crouch on the damp soil, tracing the edges of a lotus pond. At first glance, it looks like any modern water lily. But in the Nile Valley, lotus seeds were food, medicine, and symbol rolled into one. You imagine plucking the flat seed heads, those odd little showerhead-looking pods, breaking them apart and chewing the nutty kernels hidden inside. They were crunchy, almost almond-like. Ancient texts hint they could be roasted into flour cakes or eaten raw as a quick snack, sort of like trail mix for a fisherman poling his raft. Historians still argue whether these seeds were staples or just ritual food, but evidence of storage jars filled with them suggests they weren't merely ornamental. Nearby, the papyrus stalks tower above you, green spears brushing against your shoulders. Papyrus, not just paper, though that's the headline it always gets in your school books. You strip the stalk, peel back the fibrous skin, and chew the juicy core. It's watery, cucumber-like, refreshing in the desert sun. This is one of those quirky tidbits most people never hear. Papyrus wasn't just for scribes, it was for snacks too. Imagine stopping at the Nile roadside equivalent of a food cart, except the menu is just papyrus on a stick. Not the most glamorous cuisine, but when you're hot and half dehydrated, it works. The riverbanks teem with roots and rhizomes that blur the line between food and medicine. You stumble upon cattails, their brown, cigar-shaped heads swaying in the breeze. Some records suggest people roasted the roots, grinding them into flour. The result probably tasted earthy, a bit smoky. You'd need strong teeth and stronger patience. But in lean years, these forgotten riverbank foods filled bellies. There's even a fragment of folk wisdom that says eating too much cattail root made you sluggish. Kind of like downing 3 Thanksgiving dinners and wondering why your sandals suddenly feel heavier. Moving inland, you picture the villages clustered near irrigation canals, where mud brick houses huddle together. Women kneel beside grinding stones, working seeds from lotus and grains of emmer wheat into doughs that fed entire households. The mix of river foods and cultivated crops blurred seamlessly. Lotus seeds might get tossed into the same flatbreads that we'd recognize as proto-pitas today. The fragrance, you imagine, would be faintly floral, carrying the scent of the marsh. And then there's the hidden snack, tiger nut. Despite the fierce name, it's not a nut at all, but a tiny tuber dug up from the soil. Archaeologists have found them in ancient Egyptian tombs, sometimes still preserved as shriveled little lumps. Crunchy when dried, sweet when chewed fresh, they could be ground into a paste or mixed into beer. Yes, tiger nut beer was a thing. Nutty, sweet, possibly flat, and probably the kind of drink you pretend to enjoy while nodding politely at a friend's experimental brewing. Historians still debate whether it was widely consumed or more of a festival treat, but it shows that Egyptians had a knack for squeezing flavor out of whatever the Nile's soil gave them. The river, though, wasn't just generous, it was moody. Each flood season left behind fertile mud, but also uncertainty. One year's lotus feast could be another year's papyrus famine. You imagine yourself trailing along a muddy path, sandals slipping, carrying a woven basket that feels too light because the plants didn't grow as they should. This is where forgotten foods like reeds, water chestnut relatives, and wild greens suddenly became survival foods. There's a bitter edge to chewing them, like gnawing on resilience itself. As twilight stretches across the river, you lean against a papyrus thicket and watch fishermen cast their nets. You wonder what they munched while waiting for fish to bite. Maybe a handful of lotus seeds tucked into a pouch at the waist. Maybe a strip of dried tiger nut cake, chewy and dense. The sort of snack bars of antiquity. You almost want to unwrap one and check the label. Ingredients: roots, seeds, river water, and a little desperation. And here's the lighter joke. The Nile provided so much, but it didn't come with modern cooking instructions. Imagine an ancient mom shouting at her kids, "Don't just eat the papyrus raw, boil it first, or you'll be bloated all night." Some things never change. So, as you trace your way deeper into the marsh, you feel the Nile's forgotten buffet laid before you. Lotus seeds that crunch under your teeth, papyrus cores dripping moisture, tiger nuts hiding in the soil, cattail roots that require grinding, and river greens with their bitter sting. The flavors are subtle, the textures chewy, and the survival value undeniable. And while today's supermarkets dazzle with fluorescent displays of fruit, the Nile once sustained lives on these humble, half-remembered plants. You're still drifting along that riverbank in your mind, lulled by the creak of wooden oars and the chatter of unseen birds nesting in the reeds. The air grows sweeter here, less marsh and more orchard, as though the river has decided to show off its more glamorous offerings. You step onto the soft silt, and the first thing you notice is the sycamore fig tree. Its trunk spreads wide, bark pale and patchy, with branches heavy under fruits that look familiar but taste oddly different. This isn't the Mediterranean fig you pick up at a farmer's market today. It's the Egyptian cousin, more fibrous, less sugary, and prone to rotting unless you scar its skin to coax ripening. Ancient farmers figured out that trick thousands of years ago, scratching the fig's surface so it would swell and sweeten. Historians still argue whether that was discovered by accident or ritual, but either way, it kept bellies full. You pluck one, press it between your fingers, and feel the stickiness coat your skin. Bite in, and the flavor is subtle, Not a burst of candy sweetness, but a slow, grainy chew, something that lingers in your teeth. Priests offered these figs in temples, seeing them as food of life, tying them to Hathor and eternal nourishment. In fact, some tomb walls show banquets where figs pile higher than bread loaves, suggesting they were more than peasant food. They were sacred indulgence. Not far from the sycamore fig looms another tree lost to modern grocery aisles, the persea. If you squint, you might confuse its fruit with a small avocado, though its taste leaned more toward mango, sweet, tangy, with a scent that clings to your fingers long after you've eaten it. The persea has all but vanished today, though ancient texts praise it as the tree of youth and protection. There's even an old belief that the goddess Isis used persea fruit as an emblem of rebirth, placing it among offerings to the dead. Archaeologists still puzzle over whether the persea of those texts was truly this fruit or another now extinct cousin. Imagine trying to track a fruit through 3,000 years of translations. It's the produce aisle equivalent of a mystery novel. You lean back, juice dripping down your wrist, and realize that the Nile Valley diet wasn't just about survival. These fruits added sweetness to a world that could be brutally hot and dry. Picture an Egyptian laborer after hours of hauling limestone blocks. What better reward than a fig cooled in river water, or a persea split open under the shade of a sycamore? Sweetness was relief, and relief was sacred. Here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used figs to fatten cattle, stuffing animals with the pulp to improve flavor before sacrifice. That's one way to make fig-fed beef a thing. Forget Wagyu. The ancient version might have been even stranger. And while you nibble this chewy fig, you can't help but wonder whether some unlucky scribe had to record how many cows had their dinner upgraded from hay to fruit. The shade deepens as evening settles, and you notice date palms lining the horizon. Sure, dates aren't forgotten today, but their role along the Nile is often underplayed. Every part of the tree served a purpose. Wood for beams, leaves for mats, fruit for energy. Egyptians even brewed date wine, though by all accounts it was syrupy and thick. Imagine pouring yourself a glass and realizing it tastes like liquefied raisins, strong enough to make you smile, but not exactly something you'd serve chilled at a dinner party. Historians still debate whether date wine was common in everyday households or reserved for festivals, but it was certainly strong enough to inspire a few late-night mistakes. Even in ancient times, you shift your gaze and notice how these fruits weren't just food. They were woven into mythology. Sycamore figs often appear in funerary art, where the goddess Hathor reaches through the tree, offering nourishment to the soul of the dead. Eating a fig wasn't just filling your stomach, it was tasting divine blessing. Persea fruit, meanwhile, supposedly strengthened the heart and protected against evil forces. Whether that's genuine medicinal effect or just spiritual branding, we'll never know. But you can picture yourself in a mud brick courtyard, an elder pressing a persea into your palm with a knowing smile. Eat this, child. It will guard your spirit. And then, the modern aside sneaks in. If fruits were so sacred, you'd think archaeologists would have refrigerators in tombs by now, stocked with ancient fig pudding for taste testing. Instead, they find shriveled lumps, preserved only by the desert's relentless dryness. Imagine unwrapping a 3,000-year-old fig bar, sniffing it cautiously, and muttering, "Yeah, definitely past its sell-by date." Still, you wander deeper among the orchards, breathing in scents that feel both foreign and familiar. These fruits remind you that sweetness wasn't cheap or ordinary. It was a miracle of water, soil, and sun. Figs that had to be scratched awake. Persea fruits that might vanish if not honored. Dates that blurred the line between feast and fermentation. Together, they made life along the Nile not just bearable, but flavorful, spiritual, even luxurious. And as you lean back under the sycamore, fingers sticky, belly warmed, you realize the forgotten fruits are less forgotten now. They linger in myths, in seeds lodged in pottery shards, in whispers on temple walls. And you can almost taste them still, if you close your eyes and let the Nile breeze carry their sweetness to you. The breeze shifts, and with it, the scents of the orchard fade into something sharper, earthier, the sort of smell that makes your nose twitch. You follow it into the shaded courtyards where bundles of herbs hang drying from mud brick walls. This is where the Nile's forgotten garden really whispers, through stalks, seeds, and petals that people chewed, ground, or brewed into potions. You lean over a low basket filled with coriander. The seeds rattle like pebbles, tiny spheres of spice that today feel utterly ordinary. Yet along the Nile, they were treasured for flavoring bread and soothing stomachs. You crush a few between your fingers, releasing a citrusy aroma that makes your eyes flutter shut. Ancient bakers sprinkled them into dough, creating loaves that carried both taste and medicine. Historians still argue whether coriander was native to Egypt or imported through early trade routes. But either way, it nestled comfortably into the Nile kitchen. And just imagine a weary worker biting into a coriander-flecked loaf and thinking, finally, bread that doesn't taste like plain mud. Next, you crouch beside a bowl of fenugreek seeds, golden and angular, like tiny pyramids in miniature. Their flavor is bitter, almost maple-like when roasted, though perhaps that's wishful modern imagination. Egyptians ground fenugreek into medicinal pastes, fed it to nursing mothers to increase milk, and even used it in embalming recipes. Yes, the same plant that flavored dinner also perfumed the dead. You almost hear a sarcastic priest muttering, "Waste not, want not." A quirky tidbit? Some records suggest fenugreek was brewed into a kind of beer, an experiment probably greeted with the same polite smiles people give to kombucha today. Yes, of course I love it. Please don't make me drink another. And then, in a quiet alcove, your eyes fall on a basket of dried blue lotus petals. Their color has dulled with time, but even in this dusty light, they glow faintly. This flower wasn't just pretty, it was intoxicating. Steeped in wine, blue lotus released alkaloids that blurred the line between medicine and mild hallucinogen. Imagine a banquet where guests sip lotus-infused wine, drifting into laughter that melts into song. You might call it ancient Egypt's version of a party trick, except with more hieroglyphs and fewer karaoke machines. Historians still argue whether the blue lotus was truly psychoactive or simply symbolic. But the artwork, lotus flowers tucked behind ears, clutched in dancers' hands, suggests that Egyptians valued its dreamy effect. You breathe in the mingling scents, coriander bright, fenugreek earthy, lotus floral, and faintly honeyed. And suddenly, the Nile diet feels less about filling bellies and more about shaping moods. Herbs were the subtle strings of daily life, tugging at health, spirit, and even pleasure. Picture a healer crouched beside a patient, grinding coriander to ease indigestion, sprinkling fenugreek to reduce fever, and waving a lotus blossom over the bed as a charm. Was it science, magic, or simply hope disguised as fragrance? Scholars debate endlessly, but you realize the truth may not matter. For the sick villager, the act itself was medicine. And here's a modern aside. You can almost see an ancient commercial. Try Pharaoh's Blend, TTM. Coriander for zest, fenugreek for energy, lotus for sweet dreams. Available now in your local temple store. Marketing hasn't changed all that much. Only the packaging did. The Blue Lotus deserves another moment, though. You picture a moonlit festival, musicians plucking strings, dancers spinning in linen skirts, and cups of lotus wine passing from hand to hand. The petals float on the surface, a garnish that's part ritual, part intoxicant. Were they all tipsy or all entranced? Or maybe just enjoying an excuse to nap under the stars while pretending it was divine inspiration? Your steps carry you past drying racks where herbs line up like a dusty rainbow. Cumin, garlic, dill. Some of these survived history's sieve, still seasoning our soups today. Others faded, lost under layers of sand and trade. But in this moment, they all hum with life, waiting for your hand to crush, sniff, taste. A memory surfaces from earlier in the journey. Remember that papyrus core you chewed by the riverbank? Pair it with a sprinkle of coriander, and suddenly you've got something more than survival. Flavor transforms necessity into comfort, and comfort into culture. These herbs didn't just spice food, they spiced the rhythm of life itself. One more joke before you move on. Somewhere out there, an ancient teenager probably complained, "Ugh, Mom, not coriander bread again," which proves that culinary boredom is eternal. So you walk deeper into the perfumed courtyard, the air thick with spice, the ground littered with seeds that glint like tiny stars. And you realize that while fruits fed the body, herbs fed the senses, flavoring bread, healing sickness, even fueling dreams. In their whispers, you hear both kitchen chatter and temple prayer, as though the Nile itself wanted you to taste not just survival, but wonder. The orchards fade behind you, the spice courtyards dissolve into silence, and now your steps crunch on dry sand. The Nile still snakes through the landscape, but here its reach thins into scattered oases and stubborn patches of greenery. You've wandered to the river's harsher edges, where people clung to life by coaxing flavor from fruits so rugged and strange you'd barely recognize them today. You spot a cluster of wild melons sprawled across cracked earth. They look inviting at first, smooth green rinds catching the sun, but don't be fooled. These aren't the sweet summer melons you lug home from a grocery store. They're small, bitter, and tough-skinned. Ancient Egyptians used them less for dessert and more for medicine, sometimes drying the seeds to grind into remedies. Bite into one unprepared, and you'd probably spit it out faster than you can say Pharaoh. Yet in times of drought, Even bitter melon pulp stretched survival another day. Historians still argue whether these melons were deliberately cultivated or simply tolerated as opportunistic weeds. Either way, they're a reminder that survival diets weren't always Instagram ready. Nearby, a date palm clings to the edges of an oasis. Not the cultivated groves of the central Nile, but smaller, scrappier trees. Their fruit shrivels quicker, their sweetness muted by harsh soil. Still, a desert date was gold to a traveler. Chew long enough, and its sugars release, carrying just enough energy to press on. In some regions, people ground these dates with barley, forming dense survival cakes. You imagine carrying one in your pouch, a sort of ancient energy bar. Though unlike today's protein bars, it came with sand stuck between your teeth. You move further into the arid plain and stumble upon dome palms, their fruits woody and reddish-brown, shaped like chunky ovals. Break one open, and inside lies fibrous flesh that tastes faintly of gingerbread, though tough enough to crack a tooth. Egyptians chewed it for both nourishment and medicine. And even today, dome palm tea is sipped in Egypt as a heart tonic. A quirky tidbit: dome fruits sometimes appeared as offerings in tombs, perhaps because even in the afterlife, pharaohs didn't want to skip their daily fiber. Creeping vines reveal colocynths, fruits that look deceptively like small watermelons, but are poisonous if eaten raw. Instead, ancient healers used them in controlled doses as a powerful purgative. Imagine being sick and a physician handing you this desert fruit with the cheerful reassurance, "Don't worry, it'll clean you right out." Probably true, but not exactly comforting. Scholars still debate whether colocynth was widely known as food of last resort or carefully guarded as medicine. Either way, you'd better hope you never had to taste it. As you trudge along, the desert wind scratches at your ears, and you can almost hear the muttering of past travelers. One more oasis, one more palm grove, one more scrap of sweetness to get us through. Forgotten fruits weren't luxuries here. They were lifelines. Wild melons, desert dates, woody doom fruits. Each one tested teeth, patience, and endurance. And yet, despite the harshness, there's a beauty in their resilience. These plants thrived where most life faltered. They anchored the human story to this landscape, making possible journeys across barren stretches, supporting caravans, sustaining pilgrims. You realize that without them, Egypt's edges would have swallowed countless wanderers whole. Here's the light joke: bite into a colocynth by mistake, and you've basically invented the world's first juice cleanse. Spoiler, it won't end well. The sun dips low, staining the sand in copper light. You sit beneath a lonely doom palm, chewing on its tough, fibrous fruit, and picture a caravan winding through the horizon. Camels plod, traders murmur. Someone passes you a pouch of dates. Someone else, a bitter melon slice. None of it is glamorous, but in the crunch of each bite, you taste survival, ingenuity, stubbornness, the qualities that carried life across centuries. And as the stars begin to prick the sky, you realize the Nile wasn't just a fertile paradise. It was also this: edges of hardship, where fruits and herbs, forgotten by modern memory, once kept people alive. Sweetness, bitterness, toughness, all of it flavored the long story of survival along the river. Wind down, 300 words. The night folds over the desert now, soft and heavy, like a warm blanket settling on weary shoulders. The Nile lies behind you, its whispers fading into the distance, replaced by the hush of sand shifting in the cool air. The fruits and herbs you tasted linger only as memory, lotus seeds crunching like tiny pearls, figs sticky on your fingers, lotus wine lulling you toward dreams, dome fruit resisting your teeth yet grounding you in its earthy sweetness. Let your breathing slow, as steady as the ancient river's current. Inhale gently, as though catching the faint perfume of coriander. Then exhale, letting it drift away like smoke from a temple incense burner. The flavors and scents, once vital, now dissolve into shadows, leaving you lighter, calmer, ready to rest. The landscapes you walk through, lush riverbanks, shaded orchards, herb-scented courtyards, barren oases, fade into one another, softening into a single dreamscape. You don't need to hold on to every detail. The river has carried them for millennia, and it will keep carrying them long after you've closed your eyes tonight. Imagine yourself floating, not rowing, not trudging, simply drifting on a quiet stretch of water. The stars overhead glow faintly, their light bending across the surface, and each ripple rocks you deeper into stillness. Somewhere, far away, an owl calls from a sycamore fig tree, but even that sound feels hushed, tucked into the night's embrace. You are safe here, surrounded by the forgotten foods of an ancient land, their strength now woven into your rest. Let go of the sand beneath your feet. Let go of the riverbanks, and let the darkness cradle you as you slip gently into sleep.